Product Safety Professionals website. So be sure to check that out if you miss any moments of today's important content. All participants will be muted throughout the duration of the webinar, but we welcome your questions and your engagement with our speakers today. So if you have questions as our presenters are working through their remarks, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Submit your questions and we'll have some time at the end of our presentations to tackle those today. Again, I'd really like to thank Amazon for their generous support of this 4-part webinar series and for really helping to educate product safety professionals, especially in, again, this very important topic on emerging technologies and the challenges they present and how we can learn from them. And so let's get started. We have 2 terrific speakers today, and our keynote truly requires no introduction. And we are so fortunate to have her with us today. The Honorable Inez Tenenbaum is going to be our first and keynote speaker today, former chair of the Consumer Product Safety Commission from 2009 through 2013. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Inez. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the Emerson Leadership Institute and ADK Information Services for inviting me to participate in this webinar. My presentation is the Internet of Things and its global impact on business and consumers, and it will address these 3 issues. What is the Internet of Things? What are the potential hazards associated with products that are connected to the IoT, and how to protect consumers from these hazards? And what is the role of government in regulating the IoT? In 2018, the CPSC held a public hearing to invite comments on these 3 issues. The FTC filed these written comments in response to the public hearing, and I quote, "The market for internet-connected devices ranging from light bulbs to smart TVs to wearable fitness tracers is flourishing. This burgeoning marketplace offers enormous benefits to consumers, including many products that offer safety benefits. For example, IoT medical devices track health data that informs patients' diagnosis and treatment. Connected cars offer both safety and convenience benefits, such as real-time notification of dangerous conditions and smartphone starter and sound system control. At home, IoT devices called water bugs detect flooding basements, while other devices monitor energy use, identify maintenance issues, and remotely control devices such as lights, ovens, and wine cellars. Consumers also may purchase devices such as internet-connected locks and burglar alarms, cameras, and garage doors for their physical safety. So the question is, then, how can government agencies balance the benefit of IoT devices with consumer product safety? Let's take a look at the issues. Next slide. So go on to the next slide, please. Okay, we'll discuss what is the Internet of Things. No, go back one. Go back one. That's right. This is from the, I'm sorry, you need to go to slide 2. Stay right there. So what is the Internet of Things? There's no uniform definition of IoT. In fact, this definition comes from the CPSC status report that was produced in 2019. And it says the Internet of Things is not a consumer product. It is the enabling technology to bring new and innovative functionalities to connect consumer products. The market for internet-connected devices continues to expand with about 64 billion IoT-connected devices expected to be available globally by 2025, which is a 6.4-fold increase from 2018. Okay, now next slide. So the Government Accounting Office describes Internet of Things as meaning that it generally refers to the technologies and the devices that allow for network connection and interaction with a wide array of devices or things throughout such places as buildings, vehicles, transportation infrastructure, or homes. Okay, next slide. ASTM published a standard on the Internet of Things in 2020, and it defined IoT as a system of connected products, consumer and non-consumer, that transfer data at local, national, and global levels. Okay, next slide. The ASTM said the Internet of Things means any consumer device or physical object that is capable of connecting to the Internet or other networks directly or indirectly, and is assigned an Internet, Bluetooth, or other communication protocol address or identifier. So here's a non-exhaustive list from the AST standard of consumer product IoT products. First of all, connected children's toys, connected safety relevant products such as smoke alarms and door locks, connected TVs and speakers, wearable connected health trackers and smart apparel. Next slide. Connected home automation, security or surveillance cameras and alarm systems, connected appliances such as your washing machines and refrigerators, smart home assistants, and connected baby monitors. Next slide, please. The CPSC does not have jurisdiction over data security and privacy issues relating to consumer products. And the other federal agencies, such as the Federal Trade Commission and the Federal Communication Commissions, do have jurisdiction over cybersecurity issues. The CPSC does, however, have jurisdiction over products which, due to a breach in data security, causes the product to become a substantial product hazard. And this is taken from the CPSC staff report from 2019. Next slide, please. The ASTM definition, based on its standard that they published in 2020, said cybersecurity is protection against network-based threats that could lead to criminal or unauthorized access to the connected consumer product or to data obtained from the connected consumer product that could result in an introduced hazard to the product or non-compliance with an underlying standard, including measures taken to achieve this. Next slide, please. So what are the potential hazards with new and emerging connected products? And this comes from the CPSC status report of 2019. First of all, you could have the addition of remote operation feature for products that can be operated remotely. You could have hazardization of the consumer product after purchase. You can have the disabling of a safety feature such as fire or CO alarm. And clarity, and consumers need clarity for when an IoT device may no longer be safe due to terminating software updates. So these are examples of emerging hazards that could happen to an otherwise safe product. Next slide, please. The CPSC in the Federal Register defines hazardization as a situation created when a product that was safe when obtained by a consumer, but which, when connected to a network, becomes hazardous through malicious, incorrect, or careless changes to the operation code. Next slide, please. So hazardization occurs when a product becomes unsafe after purchase because it has been changed. Product hazardization can happen due to malicious hacking, defective third-party software, defective manufacturer updates, or consumer notification. Now, the CPSC, in its status report in 2019, used these examples of hazardization. You can have a robotic vacuum that loses its way and falls down the stairs onto a small child due to poorly designed third-party apps. Or you could have a heating system that was connected but had been hacked. And so you have an elderly resident on a bitterly cold winter day have their heat shut down. In both cases, a consumer could not anticipate the data security defect that allows the change in the product and the resulting hazardous condition. Next slide, please. Data security that is stored in or moving in and out of a connected device can impact the safety of the product, which includes the operational instructions or the software, consumer originated data, such as biometrics, which is fingerprints, setting and preference, multiple user identification, environmental metrics, such as location, temperature, atmosphere, energy, and the manufacturing products data, meaning the serial numbers across the products. And this is found in the CPSC status report in 2019. Now, if a product becomes hazardized by the modification or manipulation of its data, whether it's its software or the data supplied by the consumer or through environmental metrics, the CPSC may have cause to identify the defect that permitted access to the data in question. The CPSC could be looking for a potential defect in data security that created an unreasonable risk of injury. Now, the next slide, please. Jonathan Midgett, who is Dr. Jonathan Midgett at the CPSC, in collaboration with Commissioner Elliott Kaye, wrote a framework of safety for Internet of Things report, which is available on the CPSC website. And in that report, they cited three different kinds of products that might have special safety concerns. One was wearable or implants that have the potential for thermal burns, chemical burns, toxic exposure, allergic reactions, ingestion hazard, galvanic skin responses, sweat, potential modification to alter the fit and the comfort of the device. And the second one would be nursery products like baby monitors and connected juvenile products that have issues relating to information security and privacy. There are also issues that have nothing to do really with being an IoT product, but these are traditional hazards that manufacturers seek to avoid, which are strangulation on cords, light exposure, thermal hazards, suffocation on plush items, positional asphyxia, small part, and sharp edges. Next slide, please. And this report also talked about products that respond to hazards as having special safety concerns, such as your fire sprinklers, airbags, CO alarms, insulin dispensers, pacemakers, including reliability over product lifespan, like does it have an aging effect, power failures, obsolescence, loss of connectivity, corruption, or disruption of functionality during updates, and false alarms. Next slide, please. I looked on the CPSC website and pulled up 4 recalls of products that are internet connected and would be considered to be IoT consumer products. And as you can see, some of these were recalled that the recall had nothing to do with the fact that it was connected to the internet. There were other issues. First of all was the Nest Protect Smoke and CO alarm that was recalled in 2014 because it had a failure to sound the alert. And the activity near the alarm during the fire prevented the alarm from immediately sounding when the Nest Wave feature was turned on. So the remedy to the consumer was an automatic electronic update to connect the Nest Protect device to the wireless network. The Fitbit was recalled in 2014 because the consumers had allergic reaction to the wrist strap or the stainless steel casing on the strap and the adhesives in the strap. So this had nothing to do with the fact that it was connected to the internet. It was just an allergic reaction. So the remedy there was a refund to the consumer. The third one was in 2016, the Samsung Galaxy Note smartphone, and it was recalled due to lithium-ion battery overheating and catching fire, posing fire and burn hazards. So the remedy there was a full refund or replacement of the new phone. And that in that recall, it was the ion battery, not hacking or the software. It was the ion battery that caused the problem. And the last one was the Verizon Ellipsis Jetpack mobile hotspot that was recalled in 2021, due again to lithium-ion battery overheating. The remedy there was to update the software, and the consumers received a new hotspot free of charge. Next slide, please. So the CPSC in 2018 issued held a public hearing and invited comment and issued a notice of the public hearing in the Federal Register. And it asked these kinds of questions for people to submit, either provide comment or written comments to help the CPA work collaboratively on how to address the regulation of internet connected products. The first question was, do the current voluntary standards and our safety regulations address safety hazards specific to IoT connected devices? And how can IoT connected devices be subject to safety standards or a set of design principles to prevent injury? And who should develop these standards or create a set of design principles? Should certification to appropriate standards be required before IoT devices are allowed on the marketplace? Next slide, please. And some of the consumer hazards that could conceivably be created by the IoT devices are fire, burn, shock, tripping, or falling, laceration, contusion, and chemical exposure. So the CPSC asked in the Federal Register for comments regarding for products whose remote operation could create a hazard to consumer. Should internet connectivity specifically prevent remote operation? And how do the IoT software development methods address potential product failures that may create hazards to consumers? And what steps should be taken to prevent an internet connection from creating a hazard to consumers after a product's purchase or lease and installation? Next slide, please. So the CPSC received excellent written comments relating to the following the public hearing, as well as people's comments participating in the public hearing. And here are the examples of what the suggestions were for the CPSC to undertake to make Internet of Things consumer products safer. First of all, collaboration with other agencies. It was recommended that CPSC cooperate internationally, cooperate with the voluntary standards organizations, conduct public education campaigns, ask manufacturers and trade associations to develop individual consumer education, conduct research and data, and share that information with industry. Have best practices for the designing and manufacturing of safe connected products. Identify the risk and require consumer product certification of IoT products. Next slide, please. The CPSC responded to these regulations and developed an interagency working group on consumer product safety that included the CPSC, NIST, National Cybersecurity Center for Excellence, Food and Drug Administration, Federal Trade Commission, Federal Communications Commission, Department of Energy, and Department of Homeland Security. Next slide, please. The purpose of this working group was to find each federal agency's role and responsibility on IoT products, identify the potential gaps that agencies were experiencing, learn from each other collaboratively, develop voluntary consensus standards, and develop best practices in product design. Next slide. The CPSC also participates globally by collaborating with the OECD Working Party on consumer product safety. Now, the Working Party serves as a forum for sharing best practices among product safety authorities globally. The Global Recalls Portal collects consumer product data from governments globally and is listed on a single OECD website. The CPSC has traditional strong bilateral relationships with Canada, the United Kingdom, and European Union. And this was from the CPSC status report on the Internet of Things that was published in 2019. I might add there are other strong collaborations with Australia, with Israel, and with other countries that do research and can provide thoughtful comment to this OECD working group, as well as these bilateral meetings with other countries. Next slide, please. As I cited earlier, Dr. Jonathan Midgett and Commissioner Elliott Kaye in collaboration wrote a framework for safety in the Internet of Things, which is on the CPSC website, which outlined and discussed the roles and responsibilities of manufacturers. So let me mention a few of these. One was manufacturers should anticipate all safety concerns as new capabilities of IoT products are introduced, or products are modified, updated, or repurposed. Anticipate what you think the issues might be, what the problems might be to make the product unsafe. Perform safety guidance activities through every phase, from the concept of the product development, the manufacturing of the product, and the use by consumer. The third was to undertake cross-company collaboration with engineers and designers, programmers, marketers, and managers. Have everyone around the table when you develop your product. Next slide, please. The report further went on that said the risk assessment of products and product systems should include intended end user of the device, including use by an expert or inexperienced populations or vulnerable populations like children, the elderly, and the disabled. The risk assessment should include an assessment of all components for the product within the system, both mechanical hardware and software components. And the risk assessment should include a look at unintended consequences of actuation of any type of energy release, such as thermal, electrical, kinetic by users through remote control. Next slide. And finally, the report that Jonathan Midget and Elliot Kay developed said the risk assessment of products and product systems should include unintended interaction of the device with other IoT systems in intended and foreseeable use environments. And consequences of these types of malfunctions, like manufacturing defects. What is the failure to load a software update? What is the consequence of the corruption of data during a software update? What are other data code corruptions like sensor aging, damage, power loss, compromise, tampering, consumer notification? And what are the risk assessment of unintended activation? Next slide, please. So, in a public education campaign, if I were a manufacturer, I would say, do I conduct a robust education campaign about my product, or do I wait for regulation? Should I be proactive, or should we be reactive? I think that the more education manufacturers and trade associations and nonprofit organizations do on the front end that protects consumers from hazardization of IoT products, the less regulation that will result. I fully support proactivity versus being reactive in this area. Next slide, please. For example, this is a very creative way that the FTC supported public education of consumers. The FTC hosted an IoT home inspection challenge, which was a prize competition that challenged the public to create a technical solution or tools that consumers could use to guard against security vulnerabilities in software found on the Internet of Things devices in their homes. The winning tool, which the FTC selected, allowed consumers to scan their homes with Wi-Fi and Bluetooth networks to identify and inventory all the connected products in the home. And it allowed the users to flag the devices that had out-of-date software and other vulnerabilities, and it provided instructions on how to update these devices. And the winner was awarded $25,000 by the FTC. Now that is an example of being creative. Next slide. So let's look at the public education of consumers. Who really is responsible for this? To tell consumers what are the risks, what are the security issues, and what are the types of hazards? This campaign could be conducted by a collaboration among the federal government agencies, companies, trade associations, or nonprofit organizations. In fact, no one person should be responsible. It should be a collective effort to keep consumers safe by everyone coming together and supporting public education of consumers. Next slide, please. So what are the, let's look at the education of the individual consumer. All manufacturers selling IoT products to consumers need to educate their consumers via their website, blogs, through the retailers, consumer outreach efforts, IoT efforts on issues relating to the security of the product, hacking of the product, upgrading on software, and unintended outcomes. This is something that everyone should be responsible for. Next slide. One of the recommendations in this public hearing was that the CPSC should require certification of the connected products and maybe third-party testing of high-risk products. For example, for children's products, all the products have to be tested and certified before they can be sold in the United States. And it was suggested at the public hearing that certification has to be aligned with existing national and international standards, that alignment globally is what the desired outcome should be. And and people should coalesce around the products that they manufacture to offer certification. For example, the Z-Wave Alliance offers certification for smart home standards based on ITU standard. Now, the FTC, through this public hearing, made this recommendation that the CPSC should require manufacturers to state publicly the standard to which the product adheres. Like, what is this, a global standard that your product adheres to? Is it a domestic standard? What are the standards you're using to certify to? And then this FTC could use its authority under the FTC Act to take action against companies that misrepresent their security practices in their certification. And this is found in the CPSC status report published in 2019. Next slide, please. So what is the CPSC's role in regulating the IoT? Well, first of all, data collection. The CPSC should continue to collect as much data as possible and have a continuous open dialogue with industry about the actual hazards that they are encountering or that they are discovering in the data. And these comments, let me back up a little bit, came from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Technical Engagement Center and their Institute for Legal Reform. And I think these were very good common sense recommendations for how the CPSC should approach this issue. Also, the Chamber suggested that saferproducts.gov should be updated to allow people posting on the saferproducts.gov, not only to say what the issue was with the product, did it cause harm, but whether or not it's an IoT product, so that the CPSC would have that data and it would be public data. The Chamber of Commerce said that the CPSC should continue its research initiative and hold public workshops to continue to educate the public, as well as manufacturers and trade associations. The CPSC should update its recall handbook to allow IoT product connectivity to improve recalls. As you all know, recalls probably are less than 10% unless you do have a unique way of reaching out to all your customers. For example, if you're recalling a phone, you have the customer's telephone number. So you can go right to that telephone number and inform them that the product has been recalled and they can get a refund or a new phone. But some manufacturers don't have that access to, or retailers don't have access to all their consumers. So the Chamber recommended that the recall handbook be upgraded to allow product connectivity to improve recalls. And the Chamber said the education of consumers and stakeholders is a prime function of the CPSC's role. Next slide, please. So let me just summarize where I think that the CPSC is on this, as well as other agencies. And this comes straight from the CPSC report on the Internet of Things and consumer product safety. And it's a quote that says, hazardization of connected products will challenge product safety regulators to respond appropriately, whether through direct government intervention or via voluntary standards, consensus standards. The physical safety of consumers in a connected world must be protected. For the CPSC, this effort requires understanding rapidly emerging technologies, how personal data are used by these technologies, and the security fundamentals necessary to keep the consumer safe. I think this summarizes what the CPSC and other government agencies, both domestic and globally, are faced with. You have products that bring vast security to consumers, and you have a rapidly emerging technology field that but at the same time, you have to collect data and you have to collaborate to make sure that the consumer is safe using these products. And that wraps up what the CPSC and other agencies are facing. Next slide, please. So thank you. Thank you for asking me to participate. Thank you for all our participants for joining us. I practice law now with Wyche in Greenville, South Carolina. And I was on a webinar one time when someone introduced me as being from Witchy, Pennsylvania. No, the law firm is Wyche, PA. So I want to say thank you. And I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Inez, for that wonderful overview of the Internet of Things and how the CPSC is engaging in this emerging field. That was a great foundation for our next speaker. And just a reminder, I'd encourage everyone to go ahead and submit your questions as you think of them using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I'm sure we'll have a couple minutes at the end to tackle those. Next up is Darren Conlon. Darren is the Senior Director, Principal Engineering in the consumer segment of UL. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Darren.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that. And so just for a few minutes, we'll be talking about the UL Joint Task Group for Connected Cooktop Systems. The brief agenda is get some background on home cooking fires. Then we're going to look at some aftermarket devices that are intended to be used with these type of systems, or the cooktops or ranges. Then we'll look at the UL Joint Task Group as we're being formed to solve a problem that we saw out in the field, and then a summary of the case study related to the Joint Task Group. So let's look at some background on home cooking fires and relying upon the recent NFPA report by Marty Ahrens. And so, according to the National Fire Protection Association, the NFPA, they said this in the report. During 2014 to 2018, cooking was the leading cause of home fires and injuries, and the second leading cause of home fire deaths. Cooking, and from the same report, cooking caused an average of 172,900 reported home structure fires per year. And that's 49% of all reported home fires in the U.S. These fires resulted in an average of 550 civilian deaths and 4,820 civilian injuries annually. Now, ranges or cooktops were involved in 61% of the reported home cooking fires, 80% of cooking fire deaths, and 78% of cooking fire injuries. Households that use electric ranges showed a higher risk of cooking fires and associated losses than those using gas ranges. And one thing, I want you guys to focus on as we move forward is that unattended cooking was the leading cause of cooking fires and casualties. And here you can see the data from the July 2020 NFPA report by Marty Ahrens. You can see in this figure, on the left side, equipment unattended fires, 31% of fires were related to people not attending the cooking function. And deaths on the right side, you can see 50% was associated with the equipment being unattended. So unattended cooking was the leading cause of cooking fires and casualties. And, people don't necessarily think they should sometimes remain at the cooktop or range while they're cooking, or if they have a pan of cooking oil. They get distracted, or they have to do something else, or they fall asleep. So unattended cooking was the leading cause. And then let's talk about aftermarket devices that are intended to be used with cooktops or ranges. I'll give you a couple examples, and this is still background into the Joint Task Group. So there are several types of aftermarket devices that are intended for use with cooktops and ranges. The first type is an automatic shut-off device for electric or gas cooktop and range. A second type has an attendance or motion sensing function. So, and a third type is a knob replacement device. And these are intended to convert a non-connected, or you can call it a non-smart appliance, into a small connected appliance. And so with the knob replacement device is a very interesting, device. The user is intended to remove the knobs off the cooktops or range and replace them with these smart knob. And the knob then makes the cooktop or range, via Wi-Fi connectedness, makes it a smart product. And one other thing to say on the aftermarket devices, that typically the end product manufacturer of the range or cooktop, they did not intend for these devices to be used, on their products. And so so lies the challenge as we move forward with, I get talking about the Joint Task Group a little more. And just to give you an update on some of the functionality, you've got automatic turn-off devices, and some of these have timers and some don't have timers, and they're intended to turn off the appliance. Some of these come with a timer, a motion sensor, and automatic stove shut-off. And if you see the word stove, or if I say stove, just think range. And these devices, they're actually intended to make cooking safer. So the manufacturers that have developed these products, for instance, for those with dementia or folks that are older and they may forget they put the stove on or they put the cooktop on, and maybe you have children caring for these folks, and they're concerned whether or not their elderly parent put the stove on. And so some of these devices really give you this via Wi-Fi connectivity, access to find out if the stove is on or for how long was the stove on. And some devices allow the user via a cell phone or cellular device to, not just monitor, but to shut off the stove. Some general features of these devices, some have timers, like I mentioned, and some devices allow the user to set the time for how long they want the food to be cooking unattended. And others come with a preset time that the user cannot change. Some of the devices that automatically turn the cooktop back on, the functionality includes that, the cooktop can be automatically turned back on when someone returns to the kitchen. And so after the device turns off the range of cooktop, if someone comes back into the kitchen, and there's a motion sensor or an attendance sensor, that appliance will come back on by itself. Whereas other devices require the user to manually turn the appliance, off and back on again. And on this topic of turning a range of cooktop on and off, there's a prevailing set of requirements for that, operation. It takes, it's required to have 2 steps of operation to turn on a range of cooktop. Typically it's a push in and rotate. And that 2-step on is intended to mitigate the risk of inadvertent or accidental operation. And so a 2-step on is the prevailing requirement for these appliances, and then a 1-step off. So you want it to be someone's intentionally got to put a cooktop or a range on, 2 steps on, and it's got to be easy to shut off. So a 1 motion, typically a rotation to the off. And then, one of the challenges, the last bullet on this slide, motion sensor placement. So you've got these aftermarket devices that have attendance sensings or motion sensors whereby, if someone's not in that area for maybe 5 minutes, that aftermarket device will shut the range of cooktop off. And that's really dependent on, how well the user or the consumer installed the motion sensor, so the placement of it is critical to the functionality of the device. And I mentioned before some auto shut-off devices, both for electric and gas. The product on the right that shows here is a Firebird. This is for automatic, shut-off of a gas stove or a gas cooktop. I think this is the one that was on Shark Tank. And so this one actually operates, in conjunction with a smoke alarm or a smoke detector. So this device, if it hears, I'll use the word hears, even though it's not a lot. If it senses a smoke alarm signal, or it'll shut off, automatically shut off the gas appliance, the gas stove, the cooktop. Then I talked about the motion sensing and the attendance sensing devices already. Again, some of these devices, if you go to the website of these manufacturers, these are intended to, again, like I said before, to keep track and monitor how long a stove is on. Maybe someone isn't in the area of the range, and like I said, if you have someone that's disabled or has dementia or something similar where there's maybe a lapse in memory, or maybe someone given to falling asleep a lot. Some of these fires that have occurred is because someone put maybe a pan of cooking oil on the on the range of the cooktop, and they go in the den, they put the TV on, and they forget they put that on, and they fall asleep, and then what could result, very likely is a household fire. So you're looking at the background from the home cooking fires and the report from the FPA, and you look at the aftermarket devices, and one question for me pops up is, will these aftermarket devices, that are intended for use with cooktops and ranges, will they promote unattended cooking and increase the risk of home fires? And so let's talk about the UL Joint Task Group for Connected Cooktop Systems. The appliance industry, including the Association of Home Appliance Manufacturers, which is AHAM, and UL, seeing these things in the market, we identified a gap in the standardization or the safety requirements that needed to be addressed. And so UL invited members of AHAM, the CPSC, NIST, and the manufacturers of cooktops and ranges, both electric and gas, as well as we invited the aftermarket device, manufacturers. So we wanted to get all these stakeholders together, and we invited them to form a joint task group to develop safety requirements that address the potential risks associated with aftermarket devices that are intended for these appliances, either independently or as a system. And so the objectives of the Joint Task Group was to review and discuss the current state of requirements and landscape in the related areas. So we looked at, what type of aftermarket devices were in the market, and available to the consumer. We knew what type of, ranges and cooktops were in the market. And then after reviewing and discussing that landscape, we wanted to identify specific areas of focus for this Joint Task Group. We wanted to make sure that we narrowed the focus enough that we can get a job done, we can meet these objectives, but also to make an impact on safety. And during the course of the Joint Task Group, we wanted to make sure the makeup of the Joint Task Group was appropriate. In some cases, a Joint Task Group may be formed, to solve a problem, develop requirements, and while you're going through it, you may find that you need, other subject matter experts. So we did that. We made sure that we thought we had the makeup of the Joint Task Group was what we needed. And then we identified what the deliverables are. And typically the Joint Task Group deliverable is going to be a set of safety requirements that will be posed to the relevant industries. And so just a brief summary of our activities in the work. We categorized the aftermarket cooktop devices into the 4 that I've already discussed, and you can see them in front of you. And then we conducted risk assessments to identify gaps in safety requirements, or even gaps in the designs of the aftermarket devices based on current standard requirements. We developed a flow chart, or we can call it a decisioning tool, to help develop proposals and think through these things. We developed a decision tree to identify increased risks in the connected cooktop system. And then, and presently we're developing draft safety requirements. So we have draft proposals that certain groups of the Joint Task Group are developing and reviewing. And just a quick peek at, a risk assessment that we use for a knob replacement device. This is just a portion of it. And for instance, you can just look at the normal operation. I spoke about the off function of cooktop or range. How critical that is. You got to be able to shut that thing off. And these knob replacement devices, it's actually a small little, it's a knob. There's a small little motor in there. It's Wi-Fi connected. It's battery operated. And so we think through the potential effects of failure. And one of them is, what if there's a loss of off function? If there is, that could keep the burners on, the range on. What if there's a loss of battery power? Is that device smart enough that when there's a loss of battery power, it automatically goes to the off position and you cannot turn that thing back on? What if there's an inability to switch the unit off for some other reason, maybe from the connectedness or something? So again, failure of off function. And then we looked at severity of injury. We looked at the likelihood of occurrence. We came up with a certain level of risk, and then a risk assigned a number. Also, I talked about the 2-step on function that's, prevalent requirement in these, for the appliances. And the question is, does this knob replacement device, does it require a 2-step on, or does it function just with a 1-step on? And so, we definitely are looking to align those requirements and standardize those. So using a risk assessment, we're able to, identify recommended actions and then, responsibilities of some of the folks in the groups working on this stuff. Just be mindful of the time, so I'm going to skip just a few slides. So here's just an example for, a team was formed to vet out requirements for aftermarket devices of electric ranges, and this would be emergency stop devices. For electric product, again, we want to make sure that the emergency stop device disconnected all ungrounded conductors, that when that emergency stop device activated, all the cooktop burners are to be reset to an off state after that device activates. And then once that emergency stop device is no longer active and the user wants to reuse the range of cooktop, there has to be a manual operation to restart power to the range. And then if power failure occurs when the power comes back on, if the heat element remains, power on, that after 5 seconds, the element has to turn back off. And then we've got an exception for cooktops, which is just 300 watts of power. But just an example of some of the requirements, just a brief overview. And I'll come into a conclusion. The UL Joint Task Group is a case study. It's in one way, it's an example how UL working with industry, can pull together stakeholders that are interested in solving a safety problem in the marketplace by taking an in-depth look at the marketplace, identify gaps in any safety requirements, conduct an in-depth study with risk assessments and/or research, applied research, and then fill that gap by developing safety requirements using a consensus-based and collaborative standard development process. And even just thinking about it and stepping back, this Joint Task Group is also a means of connecting those entrepreneurs, those folks that develop these aftermarket devices with the intention of making cooktops and ranges more safe and smarter for the user, and connecting them with the appliance industry who design and make the cooktops and ranges with the same safety intent. And this is to engage with UL to solve potential challenges related to cooktops, ranges, and aftermarket devices. So in brief, this was some background, looking at house fires, home fires, looking at the aftermarket devices, looking at the challenge of when you put those two together into a system, do we have enough safety requirements published, and then seeing the gaps, and then moving forward and developing safety requirements so these things as a system can operate safely. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Darren, for that really deep dive into a specific industry and appliances related to the Internet of Things and this technology. So once again, I would ask our participants to use the Q&A function. Send in your questions. We have 7 or 8 minutes to tackle those. And to get us started, I want to come back to Inez for a moment. And you shared earlier in your remarks that the CPSC does have some jurisdiction over IoT connected products, but so does the FTC and maybe also even the FCC. So in that situation where there's multi-agency responsibility, is there a chain of command, so to speak, or is there an agency who would take the lead on addressing issues in that case? Can you maybe expand a little bit on that? Oh, I think you're on mute, Inez.
The FTC would take the lead on cybersecurity, and the FCC, looking at its enabling legislation and what its role would look at cybersecurity as well. But I think FTC is the lead agency on that. But no, the CPSC is in a unique position. The products as manufactured and used are safe. However, if they get hazardized, then it is an issue that would fall within the CPSC. So it's really interesting. That's why the working group, the interagency working group, is so important, and working with the voluntary standards for consensus standard. But the CPSC, if it becomes hazardized, then it could step in to say this is a hazard and we should recall it. But it's a unique situation that it's in because the product's safe, but once it becomes hazardized because of defaulting software or someone hacking into the system, it is a consumer product hazard. So that's when the CPSC could get involved. But it's very important to have the working group for everyone to work together to go forward on this.
Great, thank you for that. A related question then is, as it pertains to devices where software updates may no longer be provided or supported by the manufacturer of the product, and maybe you can both comment on this question. What's the manufacturer's responsibility when they no longer intend to support updates or safety of things of that nature? Is that a recall situation? Is that something where notice is required in any sort of legal fashion?
That's a good question, Darren. Very good question. Well, you could say we're no longer manufacturing this product and the consumers would have to go get a new product, or you could recall it and make them have the company take some responsibility. But that's an emerging legal issue, I think. And I don't know if that has been answered. Do you know, Darren?
I don't think that's been answered yet, Inez. You know, I'm thinking it through right now. I'm going to be very careful with my response. It's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. That's a good question, Lisa. I would think a responsible company, even if it weren't manufacturing that product, would feel responsible for letting the consumer know that they were no longer manufacturing the product, or say, you know, we've got a new evolved, improved product that does the same thing. You need to switch over for that, but we'll continue to support for a number of years your software demands. I mean, something should be thought out. But there will be manufacturers who just go out of business, say we're not doing it anymore. And if that's the case, then you're going to have to get a new product to perform that type function, I would think.
Yeah, and from a safety certification point of view, you know, there are relevant safety software requirements that the appliance must keep up with, and so if they can't keep up with it, then they would not be able to maintain their, you know, safety certification at that point.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a great debate. I think something manufacturers should continue to think about and, you know, be prepared for in the future as this technology outpaces itself in some cases.
It does.
Darren, two quick questions and then maybe one broader one to wrap us up. So Darren, for you, would there be any time when a cooktop system would automatically turn on by itself for non-Wi-Fi or non-smart systems?
The only two things I can think of on that, you know, would be, you know, for electric, say, cooktop, and it's not going to automatically turn on. So say for electric cooktop, the consumers, you know, it's got some of the burners on and there's a power outage. And they don't turn all the knobs to off, and then the power comes back on. It's likely that those burners could come back on by themselves. You know, again, not, you know, it's a function of the particular design of the products. That's one instance. And for gas, you know, fired appliances, the cooktops, ranges, very similar. If someone's cooking, for some reason the gas is shut off, you know, to the house, and all of a sudden that gas comes back on, and they have not, you know, shut those burners, you know, the knobs off to turn them off, then that thing would come on. I don't know if I'd call that automatically turn on. It would just be turned on due to a power outage or some sort of outage.
Thank you. So one more, Darren, for you. Is there any development around indoor air quality as a bigger picture as it relates to IoT? And this person says, I can see the topic relating to these incidents seen in home fire. Is there any development on UL's side of this topic?
Just, and I'm aware of stuff going on in the UL 507 which is electric fans, and that's the standard that UL uses for range hoods. And there is some talk about particulates in that space, but it's fairly new. In fact, I just had a discussion with couple of my colleagues yesterday on this topic. So we're working on it with industry again. It's a good collaboration, but things moving forward. So it's brand new. I don't have much to say on it other than that.
Okay, great. And so one final question for both of you. I think as it relates to a number of different industries, aftermarket devices can be a blessing or a curse, right? And so aftermarket devices intended to be used with a product that is manufactured by another company often are not the same quality of materials or may not function in the way that the original product manufacturer would intend. So lessons learned, Darren, from the work that you've done, and Inez, maybe second, anything you can share as it relates to that concern?
Yeah, in brief, I would say that the aftermarket device manufacturers, they have good intent. Especially when we've worked with folks, manufacturers where they do have elderly parents, people that are forgetful or they're given to falling asleep, and they're developing a device that's intended actually to make the house safer, mitigate the risk of fire. And so we don't want to, we have no intention of removing that functionality because there's a safe functionality there. But we want to make sure that when someone's using that device, it can't be abused. Well, it's hard to say that, but you don't want people using something intended for something good to be able to run to the store or go shopping as they monitor, something on the stove. You know what I mean? And so that's why we want to make sure that it meets what we call the level of acceptable risk that the cooktop and range standard area has. That device, when used in conjunction with that end product, it's got to meet that level of acceptable risk that's been, prevalent for so many years.
Inez, any thoughts on that question?
Well, this whole market is so rapidly changing that some products will become obsolete and very soon. And I think you just have to stay update. The consumer and the manufacturer has to inform the consumer that things are no longer workable. They are obsolete, and they need to go to a next generation product, or they may not be making this product. But that's why communication is going to be so important, and consumer education is so important in this area because it's such a rapidly changing market.
Excellent. Thank you both so much, Darren and Inez, for wonderful information sharing. I know this content was incredibly informative for our attendees today. I'd also like to just remind everyone in the chat, you will find the link to the website where you can access the recording of this session. Registration is still open for the remaining 3 sessions. If you haven't registered yet, please do so. You can also share with your colleagues to make sure they participate as well. And finally, as shared in the marketing materials and the emails for this series, there is a certificate of completion available for those of you who participate in all 4 sessions. There is an essay requirement and a small processing fee, but that will earn you a certificate of completion. And be sure to stay tuned to your email for more details on that. So once again, Darren, Inez, thank you so much. And again, thank you to Amazon for your support of this series. Everyone have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Take care.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.